Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. The Syrian war continues to escalate. Within a week, the picture seems to have transformed. The question now is whether Bashar al-Assad can save his regime. Two major cities have fallen to the rebels. The Syrian army is reportedly surrendering in many places. Russia and Iran continue to back Assad, but the odds are stacked against him. We look at how his defense crumbled so quickly. In Europe, a clash of the titans, America versus Russia. The foreign ministers came face to face in the same room, and fireworks followed. In India, the central bank has slashed India's growth forecast. We'll tell you why. In Bangladesh, the unelected government of Mohammad Yunus wants to erase the legacy of the country's founding father. They plan to remove the portrait of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman from currency notes. The US-China chip war is escalating, with both sides firing fresh salvos. Will Singapore go extinct? We'll tell you why Elon Musk said this. What's the mystery disease in Congo that's killing people? Hong Kong is screening travelers. Should you be worried? Why automaker Nissan says it may not survive for more than a year, and what it says about the auto industry in general, and what's with the legend of Hello Kitty? It's turned 50 and still going strong. All this and more coming up. The headlines first.
China warns US to stop meddling in Taiwan. This after the Taiwanese president says he is confident of a deeper cooperation with Trump. Lai Ching-te was on a Pacific tour with stops in Hawaii and Guam. This trip left Beijing fuming as it claims Taiwan as a part of its territory. Amid calls for resignation, Emmanuel Macron says he will not step down. The French president will serve until 2027. This after the government was toppled for the first time in 60 years. Macron vows to name a new prime minister soon. Protests continue in South Korea demanding President Yoon's resignation. This week, Yoon plunged the nation into political turmoil after the announcement of martial law. The ruling party says he must be stripped of office, adds that Yoon could try to impose martial law again. Joe Biden is considering preemptive pardons for Trump critics. This includes the likes of Anthony Fauci and Adam Schiff. However, the White House is worried about the implication of this blanket move. It comes after Trump's FBI pick vowed to go after the president-elect's critics. And NASA delays its Artemis moon missions. The plan was to send astronauts back to the moon by 2026. The delay is linked to issues with the Orion crew capsule. The moon landing will not take place until at least 2027.
City of Damascus. Will it fall next? That is the question. At this point, the odds are stacked heavily against the Syrian president. The rebels have seized control of more than 200 territories. We're talking about cities, towns, villages, and military bases. The first big loss was the city of Aleppo. It is Syria's second largest city. The rebels took control of it within 24 hours. And within days, Hama followed. Rebels could be seen celebrating openly in the streets after that. Now, the rebel groups are preparing to strike the next target, the Syrian capital, the stronghold of President Bashar al-Assad.
Thank God. Today, the city of Hama was liberated at the hands of our heroic fighters, from al-Assad's criminal gangs who have displaced people since 13 years, and thank God, our heroic fighters are coming to him, and with God's permission, we will not stop until Damascus.
Bashar al-Assad is in serious trouble. The survival of his regime is under threat, and this is not an exaggeration. Just look at what's happening on the battlefield. For 13 years, Assad has been fighting this war, pushing back against rebels and terror groups. He never got a consummate victory. In all these years, he's not managed to completely defeat his adversaries, but he did contain them and clung on to power by confining the rebels to small pockets of territory. Until 10 days back, he was in control of 60 to 70% of Syrian territory. Different rebel groups controlled the remaining land, about one-third of Syria. But in the last few days, this map has been changing. 5 years after the defeat of ISIS, the rebels have regrouped, they have revived this conflict and weakened Assad's grip on power. His military was his biggest strength. He had loyal soldiers who enabled him to remain in power and in the president's chair. But now the military is being tested and outmatched. The losses in Aleppo and Hama say it all. The rebel group HTS has managed significant gains. That's the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS. It is the largest group of rebels with more than 15,000 fighters. According to some reports, they have up to 30,000 fighters. Now, the HTS poses the most significant challenge to Assad today. His army looks overwhelmed. Reports say Syrian soldiers are not even putting up a fight anymore. Many of them surrender to the rebels. The numbers are hard to confirm as the situation on the ground is volatile and reliable sources of information are few and far between. But one assessment suggests that at least 200 soldiers have been captured. These were men loyal to the Assad regime. The rebels have also seized their weapons and ammo. We're talking about a significant stockpile, enough for the rebels to sustain this fight for months, if not years. But the Assad government is putting up a brave face. The defense minister has spoken. He says the losses in Hama are, and I'm quoting, temporary and tactical.
I affirm that what happened in the city of Hama today is a temporary tactical measure. Our forces remain positioned around the city of Hama, fully prepared and ready to carry out their national and constitutional duties.
So what's their plan? How will Assad's forces retaliate? Yesterday, we received some reports. They said that the Syrian forces have launched a counterattack. They were trying to fight back in Hama, but by evening, they retreated. So by most accounts, the Syrian military seems to be in disarray, and that's not the end of Assad's problems. He's dealing with not just rebel groups, but also growing resentment from within. Remember, it started as a popular uprising against his regime in 2011. They crushed it with brutal force. Over the years, the sentiment has hardened. People are unhappy with the president. Syria's economy is in ruins. Between 2010 and 2020, Syria's GDP shrank by more than half. The currency has collapsed. $1 is now worth 17,500 Syrian pounds. The business community, or whatever is left of it, and Assad's loyalists are losing faith. And it's the rebels who seem to be gaining public sympathy. Look at these pictures. The rebels are releasing detainees from prisons.
Where are you from?
I am from Hama. May God destroy him. We got rid of him. May God punish him. We were 1,500 persons inside. Each 500 were in one room. May God punish him, similar to how he treated the people. May God bless you and be beside you, and until victory in Damascus, with God willing.
Where does this leave the Syrian president? Completely dependent on his allies. I'm talking about Russia and Iran. Syria's military is crumbling. Its economy is already down in the dumps. And while Assad looks to Moscow and Tehran for support, it will have its limits. So far, both countries have vowed to back him. Russia has tried to tip the scales in his favor with an aerial bombing campaign on the rebels. Iran has reinforced Assad's forces by sending fighters. But the rebel offensive shows no signs of slowing. And if the momentum continues, if they maintain this momentum, Damascus could soon be in their crosshairs. Imagine Superman and Lex Luthor in the same room. Sparks are bound to fly, and that's what happened in Malta yesterday. It's a tiny island nation in southern Europe, normally stays out of news, but yesterday it was the scene of a tense diplomatic face-off. Russia versus Ukraine and the US. I leave you to decide who is Superman and who is Lex Luthor. Anyway, Malta was hosting this meeting, the OSCE meeting, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. It's a multinational security grouping. It includes nations from Europe, North America and Asia. Russia is also part of this group. So Malta invited their foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. It was a big moment for Moscow because Malta is also a member of the European Union, and this was Lavrov's first visit to an EU nation since the war in Ukraine, the first in almost 3 years. Last year's OSCE meeting was in North Macedonia, which is not an EU member, and before that it was hosted by Poland, which did not invite Lavrov. But Malta did. As expected, the meeting produced fireworks. Lavrov was seated at the round table with his rival counterparts, Antony Blinken of the US and Andriy Sybiha of Ukraine. Just as Lavrov started to speak, there was a walkout. The delegations from Ukraine, Poland and Estonia left the room. Take a look. That left Blinken and Lavrov. The Russian foreign minister took aim at NATO. He said the alliance needed a new enemy after the disgrace in Afghanistan, hence they were targeting Russia. He also accused NATO of starting a new Cold War. After that, it was Blinken's turn to speak. Though Lavrov did not stick around for that, he left immediately after his speech, something that the US diplomat did highlight.
The US and its allies threw it all away, as well as the anti-ballistic missile treaty and intermediate range and shorter range missile treaty. And the question is, what for? The answer to us is obvious. In order to return NATO to the political spotlight. After the Afghan disgrace, there was a need for a new common enemy. And the result is a reincarnation of the Cold War, only now with a much greater risk of it moving into a hot stage.
Now, I regret that our colleague, Mr. Lavrov, has left the room, not giving the courtesy to listen to us as we listen to him. And of course, our Russian colleague is very adept at drowning listeners in a tsunami of misinformation. Let's talk about escalation. Let's talk about the introduction of North Korean forces into Europe. Let's talk about the use of intermediate-range ballistic missiles to attack Ukraine.
A feisty statement from Antony Blinken. But let's be honest here, the scales have firmly tipped in Russia's favor. Blinken is an outgoing Secretary of State. His government tried very hard to isolate Russia. But Moscow is anything but. Just look at Lavrov's engagements in Malta. He met the foreign minister of Slovakia and also the foreign minister of Hungary. Both these countries are members of NATO and the EU. Yet they're talking to Sergei Lavrov of Russia. Plus, Russia knows that Donald Trump is coming to the White House. He has promised to end the war in Ukraine. He's also hinted at cutting off military aid to Kiev. That gives Moscow the upper hand. Vladimir Putin knows how to deal with Donald Trump, how to press the right buttons. We saw an example of that this week. Foreign Minister Lavrov gave an interview to American journalist Tucker Carlson. Now, Carlson is a huge Trump fan. He spoke at Trump rallies during the campaign. His name was also doing the rounds for a cabinet post. In February this year, Carlson interviewed Putin. And now he's spoken to Lavrov. Listen to what the Russian diplomat said about Trump.
What do you think of Donald Trump?
My impression, he's very friendly in, discussions, but this does not mean that that he is pro-Russian, as some people try to present him. The amount of sanctions we received under the Trump administration was very, very, very big.
Lavrov also spoke about Russia's recent military operations, including the ballistic missile attack. He attributed it to Joe Biden's decision last month. The US president allowed Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia, so Lavrov says Russia had to respond.
The United States and the allies of the United States who also provide this long-range weapons to the Kiev regime, they must understand that we would be ready to use any means not to allow them to succeed in what they call strategic defeat of Russia. So the message which we wanted to sell by testing in real action this hypersonic system is that we will be ready to do anything to defend our legitimate interest.
The last 2 days sum up where things are. When the war broke out, the West was united in opposing it. Russia was locked out of forums like the OSCE. Last year, Lavrov called it an appendage of NATO and the EU. Earlier this year, Russia's parliament passed a resolution against it. OSCE was called anti-Russian and discriminatory. But yesterday, Sergei Lavrov spoke at the same forum. Not only was he invited, he had meetings with other NATO members. It tells you how the pendulum has swung. Western unity is crumbling, Donald Trump will accelerate it, and Putin will be waiting to cash in. Let's turn to India now, where all eyes are on the Reserve Bank of India. We just had a disappointing GDP result, so the pressure was on it to cut interest rates to spur economic growth. As it turned out, the RBI resisted that pressure. They have kept the lending rates unchanged for the 11th consecutive monetary policy. But more importantly, they've also revised their forecasts. The RBI expected India's economy to grow by 7.2% in this financial year. That forecast has been cut to 6.6%. The inflation forecast has also been raised. Now, this policy came at a very important time, especially for the RBI's Governor Shaktikanta Das. His term ends next week. There is no word on a possible extension. Today, he was asked about his position at India's central bank. His answer is in our next report.
It's a tough job being a central banker. Tough and often thankless. You don't get credit when the economy booms, but you get the blame when it tanks. Just ask Shaktikanta Das, the governor of the Reserve Bank of India. He was under immense pressure this week. India's latest GDP numbers turned out to be disappointing. A mere 5.4% growth compared to RBI's 7% forecast. So everyone asked the obvious question, will the RBI reduce interest rates? Well, today we got the answer. A resounding no. The RBI kept the repo rate unchanged at 6.5%. In fact, it hasn't changed in 22 months. The repo rate is the interest on loans given by the RBI to commercial banks. The lower the repo rate, the cheaper our loans are, which is why cutting this rate spurs spending and economic growth. But not this time. Because the RBI remains worried about a major factor, rising prices or inflation. India's inflation was 6.2% in October, which is a 14-month high. Cutting the repo rate would likely have increased that. So the RBI had a choice. Play it slow and safe, or risk a spike in inflation. The RBI governor chose the safe option.
Food inflation pressures are likely to linger in Q3 of the current financial year and start easing only from the Q4 of the current financial year, that is from January to March.
It's not all bad news though. The RBI did cut the CRR or the cash reserve ratio. It's been reduced from 4.5% to 4%. The CRR is the portion of total deposits that banks are required to maintain as cash. The rest can be given away as loans. The lower the CRR, the more loans the banks can give. It's not as effective as an interest cut, but it shows the RBI has one eye on growth. But will this be enough to restore India's economic boom? Perhaps not, because the RBI has also revised some forecasts. Earlier, it expected India to grow by 7.2% in this financial year. That has been cut to 6.6%. There's some hope that government spending will pick up in this quarter. But the RBI governor flagged some challenges, like global supply chain issues, conflicts and war in Europe and West Asia, and of course, sticky inflation. The RBI had projected inflation to be 4.5% in this fiscal year. That's been hiked to 4.8%. The main worry is food prices. Indian crops remain vulnerable to climate shocks and extreme weather events. As a result, food prices are volatile. But beyond the forecasts and interest rates, the monetary policy was important for another reason. The RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das's tenure expires next week. But there's no word on a possible extension. Das was asked about this today.
Have you heard anything from the government so far, whether you are continuing this term? Okay, I'm not giving you any headline, and I think it's better we stick to monetary policy.
The RBI is expecting growth to pick up in the second half of this financial year. That would certainly settle the nerves. If not, it would set the stage for a crucial monetary policy meet in February next year. The question is, will Shaktikanta Das be around till then?
On to Bangladesh now, a country which is struggling to define its identity. After Sheikh Hasina's exit, Mohammad Yunus was put in charge. He was supposed to stabilize the country. Instead, he seems more focused on political theatrics. Since taking charge, Yunus has deepened divisions, particularly with India. He has ignored New Delhi's concerns over attacks on Hindus, and now there's a fresh provocation. Yunus has recalled 2 Bangladeshi diplomats from India. He's also trying to erase the legacy of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. The founding father of Bangladesh is being sidelined. His portrait on currency notes is set to be replaced by graffiti. Here's a report.
Not long ago, Bangladesh was hailed as an economic miracle. Its rapid growth inspired the region. But today, the story is starkly different. Bangladesh finds itself adrift, struggling to find direction after Sheikh Hasina's ouster. Months after her removal, efforts are underway to erase the legacy of her father. That's Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the founding father of Bangladesh. He's now being sidelined. His photograph is said to be removed from the nation's currency notes. The interim government, led by Mohammad Yunus, is said to be behind this move. The Bangladesh Bank has been tasked with designing new notes. What's driving these changes? The new notes will honor the July uprising, the revolt which led to Hasina's ouster. She fled to India on 5th August, paving the way for Nobel laureate Mohammad Yunus to take charge. He's now the chief advisor of the interim government. His officials are leading the redesign of the currency. The new notes will go beyond the protests. They'll also feature religious landmarks, Bengali cultural motifs, and graffiti. The redesigned currency is expected to roll out within 6 months. The new notes do little to reflect the reality of Bangladesh's financial struggles. The economy continues to face significant challenges. Inflation remains persistently high. The foreign exchange reserves are under pressure. Last month, they dropped below $20 billion. Dhaka's reserves now stand at around $18 billion. This is above the IMF's recommended threshold, but it covers only about 3.5 months of import expenses. Then there's the political instability. Tensions within the country remain high. Protests are becoming more frequent and intense. Just a few days ago, rival student groups clashed in Dhaka. Attacks against minorities like the Hindus have grown more brazen. Under Yunus, Islamists have gained new momentum. Earlier this year, he had lifted a ban on the Jamaat-e-Islami, a party of Islamists. Bangladesh would need help from its allies to get back on its feet, but Yunus is busy alienating them as well. Dhaka's relationship with New Delhi has increasingly come under strain. To make matters worse, Yunus has now decided to recall 2 senior diplomats in India. They were posted in Kolkata and Agartala. Bangladesh has consulates there. Recently, both missions faced protests. After weeks of turbulence, a reset might be on the horizon. Reports suggest that India's Foreign Secretary could visit Dhaka soon. Bangladesh also seems to be softening its stance on extraditing Sheikh Hasina. Reports say the Foreign Ministry in Dhaka believes this is not the right time to press the issue. The next few weeks might bring some relief to the strained relations. However, Yunus's actions so far give little hope for long-term stability.
The 20th century was dominated by oil. Countries fought for it. They scrambled to control it. For the 21st century, it's chips. Chips are the new oil. You cannot see them, but they're everywhere. From your phones to your cars to microwaves, chips are omnipresent, which makes them a $611 billion industry. Right now, two countries are battling to control it: the United States and China. On Monday, Washington drew first blood. It announced new sweeping restrictions. The target was China's access to advanced chips. This crackdown includes curbing exports to 140 companies, tightening control of chip-making gear, and stopping the export of US and foreign-made HBM to China. HBM stands for high bandwidth memory chips. They're used in high-performing computing applications like artificial intelligence. Basically, the US has one simple goal: stop China from developing advanced AI tools. That's what this new ban is about. And of course, China did not take it well.
These actions severely disrupt the international economic and trade order, destabilize global supply chains, and harm the interests of both Chinese and U.S. companies, as well as the global semiconductor industry. We urge the United States to respect the law of the market economy and the principle of fair competition. If the U.S. insists on escalating control measures, China will take necessary measures to resolutely protect the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese enterprises.
Beijing talked about retaliation and they walked the talk. On Wednesday, China banned the export of rare metals to the US. This includes gallium, germanium, and antimony. And why are they important? Because you need these metals to make chips. Now look at the numbers. China controls 94% of the world's gallium production, 94%. It also controls 83% of germanium production, and China is the largest producer of antimony. So Beijing played to its strengths, curbing the export of these metals to the US. It's a drastic escalation, but it's not the first. The Biden administration has long tried to curb China's chip abilities. In fact, this is the third crackdown in 3 years, and it may get worse in the months ahead because Donald Trump is set to take charge in Washington. He too has a hawkish stance on this issue. Washington has two major worries at this point. One, advanced artificial intelligence tools. So far, the US has been leading the AI race, and it wants to keep it that way. It wants to maintain the lead. It cannot stop China from acquiring the know-how, so it is trying to derail the development process. The other worry is defense. Xi Jinping has big plans for the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, that's the Chinese army. A big part of it includes cutting-edge AI-driven weaponry. That's what China wants. But for that, they need technology. And that has left the United States spooked. So they're trying to restrict access. Basically, they're trying to ensure that China gets nothing, neither the hardware nor the talent. Now, this is a setback for Beijing. Its chip production industry is new. They're far behind the United States at this point. They need both technology and homegrown talent to beat Washington. The tech seems difficult to come by, but Beijing has come up with a new plan, a small giant strategy. You see, the US has a few major chip giants, a few companies, the likes of NVIDIA, AMD, even Intel. China does not want that. It wants small chip and tech giants, and a lot of them. Currently, Beijing has 14,600 small privately owned companies, 14,600 companies. They are driving this industry. 5,000 of them are working in new technology like AI. 90% are manufacturing companies, 80% operate in strategic industries, the likes of semiconductors and aerospace. China's plan here is to cultivate these obscure companies, pump a lot of money into them, grow them into important assets, and scale up the tech competition with the US. So it's going to be Washington's big companies versus Beijing's mini giants. And what's next? Trump has already made his intention clear. He will escalate this further. As things stand today, the chip war is far from over. It is in fact escalating. Two superpowers, each with their own strategy. The United States wielding its technological might and China mobilizing an army of small companies. It's a battle that could well define the world in the years ahead. And it's not just about chips. It's about who will dominate the 21st century. Singapore is going extinct. That was Tesla CEO Elon Musk's big tweet on Thursday. The comment was a response to a post about Singapore's baby crisis. And it's not just Singapore. Musk thinks a lot of countries will go extinct. He has not named them. But earlier this week, South Korea made headlines for the same reasons, on being the first country to disappear from Earth. The headlines itself may sound alarming, but the reason is very simple. The dropping fertility rate across the globe. The ideal fertility rate required to sustain a population is 2.1. In some countries, it has dropped below 1, and that has sparked concerns. So is Singapore really facing extinction? Which other countries may go the same way? Our next report tells you.
In every corner of the world, the signs are becoming harder to ignore. Once bustling towns grow eerily quiet. Schools shut their gates for good. Entire villages vanish. Humanity, for centuries, has thrived on the foundation of growth and reproduction. But now, the numbers tell a chilling story. Birth rates are plummeting. Populations are aging. And the survival of nations hangs in the balance. A stark warning came from Elon Musk. He tweeted, "Singapore and other countries are going extinct." The reason? Falling fertility rates. Singapore's fertility rate has been declining for some time now. But in 2023, it fell to a historic low of 0.97. This refers to the number of children a woman is expected to have in her lifetime, and it has left the city-state alarmed. So Singapore did what all governments do. It tried to throw money at the problem. But even that did not help. Singapore's baby crisis is because of a couple of reasons. The cost of living crisis. The expenses of raising a baby and the difficulties managing work and family commitment. Just offering parental leaves or cash incentives doesn't make them go away, and it's the same situation in many countries across the globe. Like South Korea, earlier this week, it made headlines on how it could be the first country to disappear by 2100. The reason again was a population crisis. South Korea already has the lowest birth rate in the world. In 2023, it fell by another 8% to 0.72. If the trend continues, in 50 years, nearly half the population will be older than 65. Japan, too, has a similar trajectory. It was once the world's 11th most populated country. But its population is expected to have before the end of the century. Japan now sells more adult diapers than baby diapers. Then, there is China. Until recently, it was the world's most populous nation, accounting for a sixth of the global population. But Beijing too is dealing with falling birth rates, and this isn't just a developed country problem. In 2023, Brazil showed the slowest population growth on record. So this is truly a global problem. In 1950, the average woman had 5 children. Today, that number is just over 2, and in many developed nations, it's far below that. For a population to hold steady, the number should be 2.1. So, what's driving this global phenomenon? The reasons are complex and intertwined. Rising urbanization, the high cost of living, and shifting cultural norms all play a role. Many young people are delaying or foregoing parenthood altogether. That is due to financial instability and career priorities. Women's empowerment too plays a role. Access to education allows more women to choose if and when to have children, and this is an economic catastrophe. Fewer people mean fewer workers, fewer consumers, fewer taxpayers. National economies are built on demographic momentum, and that momentum is grinding to a halt. The cost of an aging population will be astronomical. Healthcare systems will buckle, pension funds will collapse, economic growth will stagnate. Governments are throwing money at the problem. Tax breaks, incentives, more leaves. But money cannot create babies. Governments need to understand, it isn't just about creating children, it's about creating a world where people feel they can. Or else, civilization as we know it, could run out of people.
Disease X, that's what it's being called. It's a mysterious illness and it is circulating in a remote part of Africa's DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. So far, at least 376 cases have been reported. About 200 of them are among children younger than 5, and 79 people have died. These are the government figures. But some reports say that the actual numbers are much higher, more than 140 deaths. Yet no one knows how this disease spreads, what causes it. Some nations are taking proactive measures. Hong Kong, for instance, has tightened airport screenings. Japan has issued a travel advisory, and international health authorities are scrambling to find answers. This outbreak has renewed concerns about the next pandemic. So how worried should you be? Here's the report.
It all started on October 24th in the Congo province of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The first patient fell ill. They displayed flu-like symptoms with fever, headache, cough, breathing difficulty and anemia. Soon, others followed. So far, at least 376 people have fallen sick. Out of this, about 200 are children younger than 5 years. At least 79 patients have died. That's the government figure, but as per some reports, at least 143 people have been killed, while dozens are falling sick. The disease remains a mystery. It's being called Disease X. It wasn't until December 1st that the national government was notified. Ever since, they have been scrambling to find answers.
It looks like a respiratory-type illness. I said, it looks like. We only received the alert 4 or 5 days ago, so don't think that in 4 or 5 days we can already identify the mode of transmission. Is it a waterborne disease? Is it a waterborne bacterium? Is it a cough-borne respiratory disease? I can't answer these questions yet.
We are really on maximum alert. We need to confirm through the diagnostics the suspicions around whether the unknown disease is a respiratory infection.
Testing is still underway, but it's a race against time. And while the disease is circulating in remote Congo, the entire nation is on alert.
The teams are engaged, and when we have the diagnostic results, we can better deal with the situation, steer our interventions, because for now there is no precise diagnosis. It's hard to say whether it is a viral or bacterial illness, but we hope that in the next 24 to 48 hours the lab tests will tell us.
International health authorities like the World Health Organization are desperate to find answers as well. Some countries are taking precautions. Hong Kong has tightened health screenings at the airport for visitors arriving from Johannesburg and Addis Ababa. These are the 2 African transit hubs that ferry travelers from the DRC. Japan is also on alert. Their foreign ministry has advised people against unnecessary travel to the region affected by the outbreak. While many questions remain unanswered, this outbreak has renewed concerns of the emergence of a new pathogen. It may have the potential to spread across the world. We could witness a new pandemic just a few years after the Wuhan virus forced countries to shut down borders and brought entire nations to a standstill. So, should you be worried? When it comes to Disease X, no one is sure yet. Researchers claim they will have an idea in a few days when the test reports finally come. They are tracking the outbreak. But international scientists also say that the possibility of a pandemic is always there. A new report is out. Researchers in China claim that the world is on the brink of the next pandemic, with evidence of new pathogens, cases of bird flu, and virus strains found in the wild now infecting humans. The birth of a pandemic may be random, but it's in our favor to be prepared.
Our next story is about the fall of an icon, the automaker Nissan. It used to be everywhere at one point, in the Fast and Furious movies, in console games, and in magazines and toy sets. But now Nissan is on life support. The company may not survive beyond 2025. And who is saying this? Senior executives at Nissan. They say the company can survive up to 12 or 14 months. It needs to find a major investor by then. If not, Nissan could go bankrupt. The CEO has also admitted that hard times are ahead. His name is Makoto Uchida. He's planning to cut 9,000 jobs. He will also reduce production capacity by 20%. Plus, he's taking a pay cut himself. The CEO is forfeiting half of his salary. All of this is expected to save $2.6 billion in costs. It's a big figure, but it's not going to be enough. So tonight, we are focusing on three questions. How did things go wrong with Nissan? What does their future look like? And what does it say about the auto market in general? Let's start with Nissan. It was founded in the year 1911 in Japan. Today, they are the 9th biggest auto company in the world. In many ways, Nissan was ahead of its times. They introduced the first mass-market electric vehicle back in 2010, the Nissan Leaf. They also had a sizable foothold in China and the US, their two main markets. Then how did things go so wrong? Well, Nissan faced three main problems. The first was leadership. For almost 18 years, the company was led by one man, Carlos Ghosn. But in 2018, he was arrested in Japan. He was accused of financial fraud at Nissan. Ghosn was placed under house arrest, but he later escaped to Lebanon, and that too by hiding himself inside a box on a plane. Clearly, that episode destabilized Nissan. Ghosn's successors could not crack the code, so leadership or the lack of it was a major problem. The second problem was a failed bet on EVs. Like I said, Nissan had EVs in 2010, but they could not keep up with Tesla or their Chinese rivals. The design, the technology, all of it was slightly outdated. Plus, Nissan did not have hybrid models. These are cars that use both fuel and batteries. That's why hybrid. A lot of customers find EVs too expensive, so they buy hybrids instead. But Nissan could not tap into that market either. As a result, sales plunged. Nissan sold 3.3 million vehicles last year, which is 40% down from 2017. Same with the share prices. Nissan is almost 47% down in the last 5 years. It has lost $30 billion in market value in under a decade. Then we come to problem number 3. The loss of a major partner and shareholder, the French automaker Renault. Renault saved Nissan from bankruptcy in 1999. They bought a 43% stake in Nissan. But 25 years later, Renault is leaving the partnership. They're selling their stake, which has left a big financial hole. Now, those are the three reasons for Nissan's downfall: leadership issues, inability to compete with modern EV makers, and the exit of a long-time partner. That is why they're sinking. Which brings us to the second question. What does the future look like? Well, simply put, Nissan needs to find a new investor, someone who can scoop up the Renault shares, someone who can inject some cash to keep things running, and a number of names are doing the rounds. Among them is Honda. Nissan and Honda already have an EV partnership. Perhaps that could evolve into something more, something bigger. And now to the final question. What does this say about the auto industry in general? That it's going through a churn, that much is clear. The old boys are struggling to keep up with the new ones. By old boys, I mean the likes of Volkswagen and Nissan. The new ones are Tesla, BYD, Rimac. Volkswagen has reported a 60% drop in profits. They're thinking about shutting down 3 plants in Germany. Another victim is Stellantis, the makers of Jeep, Fiat, and Citroën. Their car sales were 20% down compared to last year. So the Stellantis CEO resigned on Sunday. Meanwhile, the newer car companies are thriving. Just look at the top 5 automakers by market value today. Tesla is at number 1. BYD is at number 3. You have Ferrari at number 4, but they don't count as a mass market car. So going forward, expect major changes in the auto sector. Government regulations are changing, customers are changing, and so is automotive technology. Companies that adapt will end up surviving. Those that do not will perish or be gobbled up. Let's see which fate awaits Nissan. The year was 1974. Yuko Shimizu, a 24-year-old illustrator, started working for Sanrio. It's a Japanese company. It specialized in strawberry prints. But Sanrio wanted to create another design, something different. So they gave Shimizu a new brief. And it was just one word, kawaii, which is Japanese for cute. So Shimizu put pen to paper. She drew a bubble-headed, bow-wearing, dot-eyed character. And so it began. Hello Kitty was birthed. This week marks 50 years since. But Hello Kitty shows no signs of aging and no signs of slowing down. She made her debut on a coin purse. But by midlife, she has become a pop icon, an enigma, and most of all, a business empire. Apart from apparently reading and baking, Hello Kitty makes about $4 billion annually. More than 50,000 different Hello Kitty items are sold across 130 countries, and just about anything goes. From dumplings to pet collars, from electric guitars to gold pendants. Hello Kitty has collaborated with Adidas, Swarovski and Balenciaga. She has been the face of themed restaurants, amusement parks, museums, bullet trains and panic-inducing McDonald's Happy Meals. She has been a UNICEF ambassador and a special envoy for Japan's foreign ministry. Avril Lavigne sings about her, Lady Gaga wears her, and King Charles wishes her birthday. This is the lasting power of Hello Kitty. After Pokemon, she is the second highest grossing media franchise in the world because she is the so-called CEO of Super Cute. But let's be honest, cuteness alone has not raked in $80 billion in all these years. That's how much money Kitty has earned in her lifetime, $80 billion. This has required some shrewdness as well. And it's a lesson in brand building. So let's focus on three big takeaways. First, smart business expansion. Years ago, Sanrio focused on selling Hello Kitty products in its own stores, but the profit margins were small. So by 2008, they licensed Hello Kitty and they did it aggressively. This meant far less risk. The same control of Kitty's image, but billions in royalties. The second takeaway is right target audience. Like most successful brands, Hello Kitty has tried to attract young fans, and this is essential because as they grow older, they carry the brand with themselves. They transfer it to their kids. So there are Hello Kitty toys for kids, Hello Kitty, the TikTok sensation for teens, and for adults, Hello Kitty makeup lines in Sephora, marathon races in Singapore, and basketball mascots in the US. Which brings us to the next strategy, adaptability. About a decade ago, Kitty's appeal began waning. Sales were shrinking. Back then, Kitty earned about $5 billion a year. Within a few years, that number has reduced by $1 billion, but it has stayed pretty much constant ever since. Because Hello Kitty continues to adapt. She's expressionless. She's non-threatening. She's open to interpretation. So she can integrate with most brands, which is a perfect money-making machine, even if that machine needs repairs every now and then. Now you may say, a lot of other brands use all these three tactics, like Pokemon, Mickey Mouse, and Star Wars. And that is true. But what sets Hello Kitty apart is her paradox. She is inherently simplistic in terms of design. It is just a few basic shapes put together. She is cheap to reproduce. And she's easy to recognize. But she's hard to get to know. As per the company storyline, Kitty may have been born in Japan, but she lives in London. Thus, Kitty is not a cat. Apparently, it is a girl. Which is why Kitty is not an it, but a she. And she may be a mouthless face, but most fans see her as an empowering symbol, knowing that cuteness can seem frivolous, but it is also a soft power. While Hello Kitty wields it, in all likelihood, she will not be saying goodbye anytime soon. We're heading towards a new year, so it's time to dust out the old listicles and top 10 reports. News channels have always done it, but now even music companies are on board. I'm talking about Spotify. It's the largest music streaming platform in the world. Every year, Spotify releases a curated report for each user. It's called Spotify Wrapped. It tells you how much time you spent listening to music, which artists you listen to the most, and what genre fit your mood this year. 2024 Spotify Wrapped is out, and people have pointed out something interesting. This time, Spotify used artificial intelligence to make their annual report. The result? Some pretty funny and weird messages. Take a look. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Georgians complain of police brutality as pro-EU protests enter their second week. India successfully launches a pair of European satellites into space from Sriharikota, and Joe Biden lights up the national Christmas tree for the last time as US president. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1917, Finland became independent. The country was part of the Russian Empire from the 1800s. It decided to break away after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Differences have only widened since then, with Finland joining NATO in 2023. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.
PSLV-59 प्रमोशन यान का सफलतापूर्ण उत्थापन। रेंज ऑपरेशन डायरेक्टर ने भी इसकी पुष्टि कर दी है।